I wasn't supposed to be home until tomorrow. That's what made everything so shocking, so surreal, so impossible to process at first. My company retreat in Denver had been scheduled to end on Friday, but after an unexpected cancellation of the final day's events, I decided to catch an earlier flight back home, thinking it would be a quiet surprise for my wife and kids. I had imagined myself walking in, maybe catching them off guard while they were eating breakfast or binge, watching their favorite shows, and we'd have a laugh about me being back early. But as I pulled into my driveway, something immediately felt wrong. No, not wrong, different. There were cars everywhere. Not just a few extra, but a sea of them lining the street, crowding the Saxum even parked partially on the sidewalk in my lawn. My chest tightened with confusion, and for a moment, I sat frozen in my car, gripping the steering wheel, staring at my own house like it belonged to someone else. Music was thumping faintly from inside, not loud enough to be a rave, but steady enough that I could feel it through the concrete of the driveway. My house, the place I had lived in for nearly 12 years, was vibrating. I killed the engine and stepped out cautiously, my suitcase dangling from my hand, my other hand resting on the car door as though steadying myself against a wave that hadn't even hit yet. As I walked closer, I started to hear voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, talking, laughing, clinking glasses, shouting over one another in an orchestra of chaos. My first thought was that my wife had thrown me a surprise party. Maybe she'd found out I was coming back early somehow, and she'd gone overboard, inviting family, friends, neighbors, anyone and everyone. But even as I thought it, the idea didn't fit. My wife hates surprises, and she knows I hate big crowds. Then came the smell, the unmistakable mix of grilled meat, spilled beer, cheap perfume, and sweat. My house smelled like a festival. I remember hesitating at the front door, my hand hovering just inches above the handle, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I took one deep breath, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. And then, for a split second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. There were people everywhere. On the staircase, in the hallway, sprawled out on my living room rug, leaning against the walls, chatting in tight clusters. And not just a dozen or two. I'm talking packed shoulder to shoulder, a wave of humanity filling every square foot. Someone was balancing a red Solo cup on my bookshelf. 2 teenagers were playing cards on the piano bench. And there, right in the middle of the chaos, stretching across the archway between the living room and the dining room, was a giant white banner with big, bold, glittery letters that read, Familiemans Forever. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was confusion. A deep, bone-deep confusion that made me feel detached from reality, like I'd stumbled into an alternate universe where my house had been repurposed as the set of some bizarre social experiment. I scanned the crowd for a familiar face, expecting to see at least one person I knew. My wife, my kids, a cousin, anyone, but everyone was a stranger. 92 people, as I'd later learn, but in that moment, it felt infinite. The air was humid with body heat, the music thumped steadily from somewhere upstairs, and the sound of laughter overlapped in unpredictable waves. My suitcase slipped from my hand and thudded onto the hardwood floor, but no one even noticed. They were too busy living whatever moment I had just intruded on. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked, coming out weak and awkward. What is this? No one answered. Some people glanced at me briefly, unbothered, like I was just another guest arriving late to the party. One guy in a floral shirt raised his beer in my direction, shouted something unintelligible, and disappeared into the crowd. That's when a woman in her 50s, wearing a sequined blouse and holding a glass of wine, walked up to me, smiling like she'd known me forever. "You made it?" she said, grabbing my hand warmly before I could pull away. "We were starting to think you wouldn't come." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind was blank. A scrambled mess of questions I couldn't even articulate. Who were these people? How did they get into my house? And why, out of all possible banners, did they choose the words, "Family means forever"? Before I could speak, she was already calling out to someone across the room, waving me along like I was expected to follow. And for reasons I still can't explain, I did. I walked deeper into my own home. Carried by the crowd like a twig caught in a river's current, my confusion growing heavier with every step. The further I went, the stranger it became. Family portraits I didn't recognize hung on my walls, framed candid photos of people I'd never met sitting on my shelves, and at least 3 toddlers playing with toys that definitely weren't ours. It was as though my life had been overwritten by someone else's reality overnight, and somehow, without knowing it, I'd walked into their story instead of my own. I followed the woman through the crowd, my legs moving almost automatically, like my brain had detached from my body. Everywhere I turned, strangers brushed against me, laughing, drinking, shouting over the pounding bass that seemed to be coming from somewhere upstairs. The air felt heavy, dense, charged with a kind of chaotic energy that made it hard to breathe. My senses were overloaded. The music, the shouting, the clinking glasses, the heat radiating from so many bodies packed into one space. I tried to focus on the woman ahead of me, her sequined blouse catching the dim light as she weaved through the throng with uncanny confidence, like she knew every inch of my house better than I did. At one point, I noticed two guys dragging a cooler the size of a coffin through my hallway, ice spilling onto the floor. A group of kids no older than 10 darted past me, shrieking with laughter, carrying what looked like cans of soda and slices of pizza. My living room rug, the one I had bought just 3 months ago after weeks of debating between patterns, was buried under discarded paper plates, half-eaten food, and an alarming number of empty bottles. I clenched my jaw, my hand brushing against the wall, as though touching it would remind me that this was still my home, my space, my reality. But every corner I turned told me otherwise. The woman finally stopped near the archway into the dining room, turning back to face me with a look of mock surprise, as if she just remembered something. "Oh, where are my manners?" she said, her voice warm and rehearsed, like this was a scene she'd acted out 100 times. "I'm Leela. Your cousin? On your mother's side." Her grip tightened on my arm as she said it, searching my face for recognition. Cousin. My mind scrambled, flipping through an internal Rolodex of family members, extended relatives, distant connections, but no Leela surfaced. There was no cousin Leela. Before I could respond, she clapped her hands twice and called out above the noise, "Everyone? He's here?" The room seemed to shift as dozens of heads turned toward me. For a brief, stomach-churning moment, I was the center of attention, pinned under 100 unblinking eyes, and then, just as quickly, the noise resumed like nothing had happened. People smiled, nodded, and raised their drinks in my direction, welcoming me silently into whatever collective fever dream this was. Leela leaned in close, lowering her voice. "You made the right choice coming back today. It's important you're here." Her tone was different now, quieter, heavier, layered with something I couldn't identify. Warning, maybe, or expectation. Before I could ask what she meant, she was gone, swallowed by the crowd like she'd dissolved into it. Left standing in the middle of my own home, surrounded by strangers who acted like they belonged there more than I did, I felt a rising panic gnawing at my chest. My instinct was to find my wife, my kids, someone, anyone, who could tether me back to reality. I started pushing through the bodies, muttering apologies that no one seemed to hear. I checked the kitchen first. Instead of the clean, quiet space I'd left just 3 days ago, it looked like a war zone. Every counter was covered with plates, trays of food, drink mixers, and open bags of chips. Someone was slicing into a cake shaped like a giant tree, handing out pieces to a circle of teenagers. On the fridge, taped front and center, was a photograph of a family, but not my family. 4 people I'd never seen before, smiling on a beach, wearing matching shirts that read, "Reunion 2025. My throat tightened. I tore the photo off the fridge, but before I could examine it, a man in his late 60s stepped up beside me, holding a glass of whiskey and smiling warmly. "You must be Michael," he said, patting my shoulder. I shook my head instinctively, replying, "No, I'm." But he cut me off with a laugh. Always the jokester. "Just like your father." My stomach dropped. My father has been dead for 11 years. I stumbled backward, mumbling something incoherent, but the man didn't seem to notice. He just sipped his drink and walked away, disappearing into the swarm of bodies like everyone else. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles went white, trying to steady my breath. I needed answers, and the only thing I could think to do was find my phone. Maybe my wife had texted me. Maybe she'd explained all this. Maybe there was some logical reason for what I was walking into. But when I reached into my pocket, it was empty. My phone, the one I'd been using at the airport less than an hour ago, was gone. I checked my jacket, my suitcase, even the floor, but it was nowhere. I pushed through the kitchen and into the hallway, scanning the crowd for anyone who might have seen it, but people were too busy laughing, drinking, and yelling over each other to even notice I existed. A sickening thought crossed my mind. What if someone had taken it? I spotted a teenager sitting cross-legged on the floor, scrolling through what looked like my phone. My phone case is custom, black with a single silver stripe down the middle, and there's no mistaking it. I approached him quickly, trying to sound calm but firm. "Hey, that's mine," I said, holding out my hand. He looked up at me, his expression neutral, almost bored, and replied flatly, "Not anymore." My stomach lurched as he slid the phone into his hoodie pocket and stood up, walking away without breaking eye contact. I followed him through the crowd, pushing past bodies, my frustration mounting with each step, but just as I was about to grab his shoulder, he slipped into a side room and closed the door behind him. I turned the handle, but it was locked. I banged on the door, shouting for him to give it back, but the music drowned me out, and no one even glanced in my direction. I was invisible in my own house, a ghost wandering through someone else's celebration. Defeated, I wandered back into the living room, where the giant banner loomed above me like a silent accusation. Family means forever. The words mocked me now, bold and glittery against the chaos, daring me to make sense of them. I scanned the crowd again, more deliberately this time, and something started to click: the faces. They weren't all strangers, not completely. Here and there I spotted fragments of familiarity, a jawline that looked like my father's, a set of eyes that mirrored my late aunt's, a crooked smile I could swear I'd seen in an old photograph, tucked away in my mother's attic. But these people weren't my relatives. At least, not the ones I knew. It was like staring into a distorted family tree, branches warped and tangled into shapes I couldn't recognize. The deeper I looked, the stronger the unease grew. Something was wrong here. Fundamentally, cosmically wrong. This wasn't just a party. It wasn't just strangers breaking into my home. It felt orchestrated, intentional, like I'd walked into the middle of a ritual I wasn't supposed to see. My breathing quickened as I backed into a corner, needing space, needing air, but everywhere I turned, there were more people, more faces, more laughter layered over secrets I couldn't name. I realized, with a creeping chill spreading down my spine, that none of them had ever asked who I was. Not one person had questioned why I was there. They already believed I belonged, even though I didn't. Or maybe, just maybe, they believed this house wasn't mine at all. I kept moving through the crowd, trying to stay calm, but it felt like the walls were closing in on me. Every corner of the house was crammed with people, laughing, drinking, talking, yet none of them made eye contact for more than a second. The few who did glance my way smiled faintly, like they knew something I didn't, like I was the last person to figure out the rules of a game I never agreed to play. The smell of food and sweat was overwhelming now, mixing with something faintly metallic, almost like blood, though I tried convincing myself I was imagining it. I needed answers, but every time I tried to speak, my words dissolved into the endless roar of voices and music. The banner, "Family means forever," loomed over everything like a prophecy I wasn't ready to understand. I pushed toward the stairs, hoping to find my wife, my kids, or at least some quiet corner where I could think. My hand brushed against the railing, sticky with spilled soda or beer, and I climbed slowly, one step at a time, as the bass from upstairs vibrated through my chest like a second heartbeat. When I reached the landing, I froze. The upstairs hallway, usually quiet, familiar, filled with family photos and the soft glow of nightlights, had been transformed. The walls were lined with framed photographs, but they weren't mine. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretching down the entire corridor. I moved closer, scanning the images, my stomach tightening as recognition flickered like static in the back of my mind. There were pictures of people I didn't know, yes, but also people who looked almost like people I knew. A version of my grandmother younger than I'd ever seen her, but smiling with a different husband, a man who looked exactly like my father, except he was missing the scar above his eyebrow. My mother's face, softer, unfamiliar, frozen mid-laugh next to siblings she never had. The dates scribbled in gold ink beneath each frame made it worse. 1975, 1991, 2008, moments that couldn't possibly exist in the life I remembered. My throat went dry as I stepped back, feeling the weight of dozens of strangers passing behind me, brushing my shoulders as they moved into rooms that were supposed to be mine. A sudden burst of laughter erupted from my bedroom, or what used to be my bedroom. I walked toward it cautiously, heart hammering, and peeked inside. My bed was gone. In its place was a large wooden table covered with papers, maps, and photographs, all arranged in precise, deliberate patterns. Around the table stood 6 people, their voices low, speaking in tones too serious to belong to a party. I stayed in the doorway listening, hoping for a clue. He came back early, one of them whispered, sliding a photograph across the table. "It doesn't change the timeline." Another replied, We just have to make sure he stays." My breath caught in my throat, and before I could stop myself, the floor creaked beneath my weight. All 6 heads snapped toward me at once, their faces lit in the dim light, eyes sharp and unblinking. One of them, a tall man with silver hair and a navy suit, stepped forward. "Michael," he said calmly, like greeting an old friend. "You shouldn't be here yet." I stumbled back instinctively, shaking my head. "My name's not Michael. I managed, my voice breaking on the words. His expression didn't change. But there was something unsettling in the way he studied me. Like he was searching for cracks in a mask I didn't know I was wearing. He held up a Polaroid from the table and turned it toward me. It was me, standing in this house, smiling with people I didn't recognize. The date on the bottom corner read August 21, 1998, the year I was 9 years old. But in the photo, I wasn't a kid. I was me, exactly as I look now. My knees went weak and I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, feeling the world tilt beneath me. I wanted to demand answers, scream, do something, but my voice refused to work. The man placed the photo back on the table carefully, like it was fragile, and nodded toward the others. "He's not ready," he said simply, and just like that, they turned away from me, resuming their hushed conversation as though I wasn't even there. I backed out of the room and turned down the hallway, moving faster now, needing space, needing oxygen. I ducked into what used to be my daughter's room, expecting to find her toys and clothes, but instead, the entire space had been cleared out. In the center of the room was a single trunk, old and wooden, carved with strange symbols I didn't recognize. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I unlatched it, but before I could open it, I heard a soft voice behind me. "Don't," a boy said. I turned to find a kid, maybe 12, maybe 13, standing in the doorway. His clothes were too big for him, his face pale and expressionless. "If you open it now, you won't be able to leave," he whispered. I swallowed hard, my voice finally returning in a shaky rasp. "Who are you?" He hesitated, glancing back toward the hallway before stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "They're not supposed to know you came back early?" he said quietly. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." I blinked at him, completely lost. "Who's they?" He opened his mouth to answer, but footsteps thundered down the hallway, and he froze, eyes wide. Without another word, he bolted toward the window, slid it open, and climbed out onto the roof before I could stop him. My heart was racing now, my breath uneven and shallow. I didn't know what terrified me more. The kid's warning or the fact that none of this made sense anymore. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes, trying to block out the sound of laughter, music, and footsteps pounding against the floors. When I opened them again, something on the trunk caught my attention. There was a faded sticker on the side, its letters barely legible. Project Anima. Phase Isuru. The word sent a chill through me, triggering some vague memory I couldn't fully place, like a half-remembered dream just out of reach. I pulled my hand away instinctively, as though touching it might set something in motion I couldn't undo. I stepped back into the hallway, gripping the banister to steady myself, and that's when I noticed it, the silence. The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. 90? 2 people, maybe more, and the entire house had fallen into a deafening, unnatural quiet. My stomach twisted as I moved toward the staircase, hearing my own footsteps echo louder than they should have. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw them, all 92 of them, standing perfectly still, facing the banner in the living room below. No one moved. No one spoke. The air felt electric, humming faintly like the moment before a storm breaks. Slowly, as if pulled by some invisible thread, they all raised their right hands in unison and whispered something I couldn't hear from where I stood. The sound was faint, rhythmic, almost like chanting. My pulse pounded in my ears as I crept closer, straining to make out the words. That's when I heard it, soft, deliberate, and repeated over and over. Family means forever. Family means forever. Family means forever. 92 voices, perfectly synchronized, reciting the same phrase beneath the glittering letters of the banner. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chanting stopped. Every head turned toward me at once. All 90, 2 pairs of eyes locked on me, unblinking, unbreathing, as though time itself had frozen. My throat constricted, my body frozen in place at the top of the stairs. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. It was like standing on the edge of something enormous and ancient, something I wasn't supposed to see. Then, as if on cue, one person stepped forward from the crowd below. A tall man with pale skin and dark, neatly combed hair, dressed in a perfectly pressed charcoal suit. He moved slowly, deliberately, his polished shoes clicking softly against the hardwood floor, until he reached the center of the living room, directly beneath the banner. The tension in the air thickened, and even though I was 30 feet away, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding louder than the silence around us. He clasped his hands behind his back and tilted his head slightly, studying me the way a predator studies its prey. Then he smiled, but it wasn't warm or friendly. It was calculated, deliberate, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who knows something you desperately don't. "Welcome home," he said finally, his voice smooth, deep, and unnervingly calm. The words landed like a stone in my chest. Welcome home. Two simple words, but they carried the weight of something much larger, something older than any reunion or family gathering. My lips parted to respond, but my throat was dry, and all I managed was a shaky whisper. Who are you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he extended one hand, palm up, inviting me down the stairs. I hesitated, my legs locked in place, but the longer I stood there, the heavier the silence became. And then, slowly, as if guided by something outside of myself, I descended the staircase one step at a time. The crowd parted as I reached the bottom, opening a narrow path directly toward him. When I was close enough to see the faint scar beneath his left eye, he spoke again. My name is Elias, he said softly, and we've been waiting for you for a very long time. Before I could respond, he gestured toward the banner above us. You came back a day early, he continued, his tone measured, deliberate. That complicates things. I glanced around, searching for any sign of my wife, my kids, anyone familiar, but all I saw were strangers. Strangers who somehow knew my name, who had filled my home with their voices, their photos, their memories. Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. This was supposed to happen tomorrow, at dusk, when the cycle aligned. But you've shifted everything. My skin prickled with cold, and I shook my head slowly. What are you talking about? What cycle? Who are these people? He studied me for a long moment before speaking again, his voice dropping to a near whisper. They're your family, he said simply. Not in the way you understand it, but in the way that matters. A ripple of unease shot through the crowd, though none of them moved or spoke. My stomach knotted, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't form fast enough. I wanted to scream, demand answers, run out the front door and never look back. But some instinct deeper than fear kept me rooted to the spot. What do you want from me? I finally managed. Elias's gaze softened slightly, almost pitying, as he gestured toward the banner again. Not from you, he said. Off you. My chest tightened at the phrasing, a subtle but terrifying shift in meaning. He stepped aside then, revealing something behind him I hadn't noticed before. A large, ornate wooden box resting on a stand beneath the banner. It was the same kind of box I'd seen upstairs in what used to be my daughter's room, carved with the same strange symbols and marked with the same faded sticker. Project Anima, Phasey hair. Elias placed his hand gently on the lid of the box, but didn't open it. Everything is inside, he said softly. Your answers? Your history? Your place. My hand twitched at my side, itching to reach for it, but something deep inside me screamed not to move. Instead, I shook my head again, more forcefully this time. I don't want any part of this, I said, my voice trembling. He tilted his head, regarding me with something like sadness. You don't have a choice, he replied simply. You never did. That's what family means. The phrase struck me like a physical blow, echoing in my head, syncing perfectly with the banner looming overhead. Family means forever. Forever. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Before I could respond, a sudden, high-pitched ringing filled the room, sharp and piercing, vibrating through my bones. The lights flickered once, twice, then went completely dark. The entire house plunged into silence and shadow, and for a few unbearable seconds, I couldn't see anything at all. When the lights came back on, the room was empty. Every single person, Elias, the 90, two strangers, the noise, the heat, all gone. I stood in the middle of my living room. My chest heaving, my pulse pounding, surrounded by silence so complete it felt unnatural. The banner was still there, though, swaying gently as if someone had just brushed past it, and beneath it, the wooden box remained. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, the carved symbols seeming to shift under the light, twisting into shapes I couldn't comprehend. A sound broke the silence, a soft, deliberate creak from above me. The upstairs hallway. I spun toward the staircase, my body tense, ears straining. One step, then another, slow, deliberate, heavy. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a broken chair leg from the corner, and crept up the stairs, my muscles coiled, my breath shallow. When I reached the top, I saw a shadow stretching long across the hallway floor, coming from what used to be my bedroom. I approached cautiously, heart pounding in my ears, and as I rounded the corner, I stopped cold. Sitting cross-legged on the floor was the boy I'd seen earlier, the one who warned me not to open the trunk. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and in his hands, he clutched a stack of photographs. He looked up at me slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. They're not gone, he said. They're waiting. I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the chair leg. Waiting for what? I asked. He hesitated, glancing toward the window, like he was afraid someone might be listening. For you to choose? He said finally. If you open the box, there's no going back. I stared at him, my throat dry, the weight of his words pressing against my chest like stone. "Choose what?" I demanded, my voice cracking despite my effort to sound steady. He shook his head, lowering his gaze to the photos in his lap. "Who you are," he whispered. "And who you were supposed to be?" I took a step closer, my shadow stretching across the floor toward him. "What's in the box?" I asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. He didn't look up, but his hands tightened around the photographs until the edges crumpled. "Everything?" he said. "The reason there are 90, 2 of them. The reason you know faces you've never seen before. The reason none of this feels real." My breath caught as the pieces started to connect, fragments of memory and reality clashing violently in my mind. Project Anima. The photographs of alternate versions of my family. The strangers who looked like reflections of people I knew but slightly wrong. And the Polaroid of me. An impossible version of me, standing in this same house decades ago. Before I could respond, the boy stood up, clutching the photographs tightly, and backed toward the window. "You came back too soon," he said softly, his voice trembling now. "It's not safe here anymore." My confusion deepened. "Safe from what?" I demanded, stepping forward, but he was already sliding the window open. Just before he climbed out, he looked back at me one last time, his expression unreadable. "They'll come back," he whispered, "when the clock resets." And then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness outside. I stood there in silence, the hum of electricity in the walls the only sound in the entire house. I didn't know what terrified me more. The idea that the 90, 2 strangers would return, or the gnawing certainty that somehow, deep down, a part of me already knew why they were here. I glanced toward the staircase, toward the living room below, where the wooden box waited patiently beneath the banner. My hand shook as I reached for the railing, my mind torn between 2 choices. Open the box and finally learn the truth, or walk away and pretend none of this had ever happened. But before I could decide, the lights flickered again, and from somewhere deep in the house, a low, rhythmic chanting began to rise. "Family means forever. Family means forever. Family means forever." I stood frozen at the top of the staircase, my hand clenched so tightly around the railing that my knuckles burned white. The low chanting coming from below was steady now, faint but pulsing like a heartbeat through the walls. "Family means forever. Family means forever." My throat tightened, my chest heaving with shallow breaths, and my gaze drifted back to the living room, where the box sat beneath the banner, waiting for me like it had been waiting my entire life. I didn't move for a long time. Part of me wanted to turn and run, bolt out the front door, and leave this entire nightmare behind me. But a deeper, darker part of me, the part whispering truths I didn't want to face, already knew there was nowhere to run. This wasn't just about 92 strangers. This was about me. The chanting stopped suddenly, cutting off so abruptly that the silence roared in my ears. I could hear the faint hum of the lights above, the creak of wood under my feet, and my own pulse pounding like a drum inside my skull. For a moment, it was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. I descended the stairs slowly, my legs trembling with each step, and when I reached the bottom, the room felt colder, heavier, like the air itself had thickened. I approached the box cautiously, crouching down until I was eye level with it. The symbols carved into the wood seemed alive in the dim light, curling into shapes that shifted the longer I stared at them. My fingers hovered over the lid, trembling, unsure if touching it would unlock answers or unleash something I couldn't control. I hesitated, pulling my hand back, my mind screaming at me to wait, to think, to breathe, to leave. But before I could decide, I heard a voice behind me, soft and familiar. "It's okay," it said. I spun around and froze. Standing in the middle of the living room, barefoot and pale, was my wife. Her eyes were glassy, distant, as though she wasn't entirely there. "You should open it," she whispered, her voice flat and detached, almost mechanical. Relief washed over me for half a second, but it was quickly replaced by dread. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. I stepped toward her, my voice cracking as I said her name, but she didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. "Where are the kids?" I asked, my voice trembling. Slowly, her lips parted, and she whispered just 2 words, "Not yet." Before I could react, the lights flickered violently, plunging the room into brief strobing shadows. When they steadied again, my wife was gone. Completely gone. No sound, no movement, no trace she'd ever been there at all. My knees nearly gave out beneath me, and I stumbled back against the couch, gasping for breath. I turned toward the box again, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A faint glow leaking from beneath the lid, subtle but unmistakable, pulsing in time with the pounding in my chest. My trembling hand reached forward almost on its own, fingertips brushing the cold, carved wood. The moment I touched it, the glow flared and a deep, resonant hum filled the room, vibrating through the floor, the walls, my bones. The box was alive. I gritted my teeth, grabbed the lid with both hands, and forced it open. The hum stopped instantly, replaced by a silence so complete it was suffocating. Inside, there weren't papers or photographs or objects. There was light, a swirling, liquid-like pool of soft white light, as though the bottom of the box opened into something infinite and impossible. I leaned closer instinctively, drawn to it, and as I stared into its depths, images began to form within the glow, faces, memories, entire lives flashing in rapid succession. I saw myself as a child, but not the way I remembered. I was standing in a strange house surrounded by people I didn't know. Then another image, me again, older this time, standing beneath the same banner, surrounded by the same 92 people. Another flash, a completely different version of me, thinner, older, with different scars on my hands, holding a newborn baby I didn't recognize. Dozens of versions of me, endless variations. Infinite lives splintering into one another like cracks in glass. I stumbled back from the box, clutching my head as nausea rolled through me in violent waves. My breath came in ragged gasps, my vision blurring, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. That's when I heard the voice again, but this time it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from inside the box. "Michael?" It whispered, low and steady, like a lullaby buried in static. "Michael, it's time to come home." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. I shook my head violently, shouting into the empty room, "I'm not Michael! My name isn't Michael!" But the box didn't care. The voice only grew louder, layered now with dozens, hundreds of others, until it sounded like all 92 people were inside the box, whispering in unison, "Family means forever. Family means forever. Family means forever." The light inside the box began to rise, spilling upward in tendrils, curling around my hands, my arms, my face. I stumbled backward, trying to push it away, but it was warm, strangely comforting, like sunlight against my skin, lulling me into a quiet calm I didn't trust. My mind screamed at me to fight, to resist, but some deeper instinct, older than thought, older than memory, told me to surrender. I dropped the broken chair leg, my arms falling limp at my sides, and for the first time since I walked into my house, I felt something terrifying familiarity. This wasn't foreign. It wasn't random. On some impossible level, I knew this light. I knew this box, and that realization chilled me more than anything else. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. The glow receded, shrinking back into the box, and the lid slammed shut on its own with a deafening crack. I staggered backward, breathless and shaking, as the silence returned, heavier than before. Then, slowly, the 92 strangers began to reappear. They stepped out of the shadows, emerging from hallways and doorways and corners where I was certain no one had been hiding. They surrounded me again, forming a perfect circle, their expressions blank, their bodies unnaturally still. And at the front of the circle stood Elias, his hands clasped neatly behind his back, his sharp, cold gaze locked on me. "You opened it?" he said softly, his voice carrying with unnatural weight. I swallowed hard, forcing words out through my dry throat. "What is this? What's happening to me?" Elias tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "It's not happening to you," he said calmly. "It's happening because of you." He stepped forward, just close enough that I could see the faint tremor in his jaw when he spoke. "We're what remains of you?" he whispered. "All 92 of us? Every choice you didn't make, every life you didn't live, every possibility you abandoned." His words hit me like a blow to the chest, knocking the air out of my lungs. I shook my head violently, refusing to accept it. "No," I rasped. "That's insane. You're not, you can't be me." Elias smiled faintly, but it wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was knowing. "Look closer," he said simply. And as my gaze drifted over the crowd, I saw it, the resemblance. Small at first, a jawline here, a dimple there, a familiar tilt of the head, but undeniable. 92 variations of me, of the life I could have lived, standing in silent witness to the one I did. My breath caught in my throat, my chest tightening as Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Family means forever," he said, "because there's only one family, and it's all of us." I couldn't breathe. The living room felt smaller now, as though the walls had shifted inward, pressing against me, closing me into this circle of 92 silent versions of myself. My lungs burned as I struggled to take in air, my throat tight with disbelief and panic. But I couldn't look away from Elias. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there as if he'd been carved from the same cold wood as the box. My voice cracked when I finally spoke, barely more than a whisper. What do you want from me?" Elias tilted his head slightly, studying me the way you'd study a specimen in a jar. The faintest smile touched his lips, but there was no warmth in it, only inevitability. We don't want anything, he said softly. We are you, and you've already chosen. I staggered back a step, shaking my head violently. No, I rasped. I didn't choose this. I didn't ask for this. I came home. I came home a day early, that's all. That's all. My voice cracked into something desperate raw. But Ilias didn't flinch. Exactly, he said, his tone even deliberate. You came home early? And that was the choice? He stepped closer, and as he did, the circles seemed to ripple, each of the 90, one others shifting imperceptibly in sync, like reflections in a fractured mirror all responding to the same unseen wind. Do you think it was coincidence? He asked. Do you really believe you came back today by accident? A cold chill raced through my body, a creeping dread spreading from the base of my spine to the tips of my fingers. What are you talking about? I demanded, though my voice was brittle, fragile. Elias didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured toward the box, still glowing faintly on the floor, its carved symbols pulsing like a heartbeat. That, he said simply, is Project Anima. You call it a box because you can't comprehend what it really is. It isn't wood. It isn't matter. It's a breach, a seam between choices. His gaze fixed on mine, sharp and unyielding. Nenti, 2 lives diverge from one moment, your moment, and we are the echoes. But today, when you came back early, you aligned them. I wanted to deny it, to scream at him, to call him insane, but my body betrayed me. My hands trembled, my pulse thundered, and deep beneath my panic there was a quiet, horrifying recognition in his words, as though some part of me already knew this was true. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. If that's true, if you're really me, then why now? Why this? What does family means forever even mean? At the mention of the phrase, the entire circle responded. 92 voices whispered in perfect unison. Family means forever. And the sound wasn't human. It wasn't soft or sentimental. It was vast, endless, stretching beyond the walls of the house, beyond the night, beyond time itself. It felt like something ancient, something not bound to flesh or memory, something older than the world itself. Speaking through us? Elias's eyes never left mine as the echoing whispers faded. It means, he said quietly, that there's no escape? There never was. You are one thread in a tapestry that was always woven. The box doesn't create us, it reveals us. And now that you've seen, you don't get to unsee. His words struck deep, like nails driving through bone, but still, I refused to give in. I don't believe you. I spat, though my voice faltered. You're lying. This is some kind of sick cult, or experiment, or... I stopped myself, my breath hitching, as I remembered the documents I'd seen on my wife's desk weeks ago. Project Anima. The phrase had been there, scribbled in the margins of an email chain I hadn't understood at the time. A pit opened in my stomach, cold and hollow, as pieces began clicking together. I backed away slowly, my foot brushing against the couch, and for the first time, I noticed something else. Something that hadn't been there before. In the shadows behind the circle, faint lines had begun to stretch outward across the walls, like cracks in glass, thin and glowing faintly white. The more I looked, the more I realized they weren't cracks at all. They were seams. Like the world itself was splitting open, reality peeling at the edges. The hair on my arms stood on end, my stomach twisting as Elias stepped closer, his voice low and deliberate. Do you feel it? He asked softly. The collapse has already started. The moment you touched the box, the walls began to break. You can't undo it now. None of us can. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest tightening as panic surged through me. Stop, I begged, though I didn't even know what I was asking him to stop. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the floor unstable beneath my feet, the air heavier, denser. I didn't ask for any of this, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. Elias stared at me for a long moment, and then, softer this time, almost kind, he said, neither did we. His words hung there, suspended in the silence, heavier than anything else I'd heard that night. Suddenly the house groaned, a deep, resonant sound like ancient wood under unbearable weight. The lights above flickered wildly, plunging us into brief flashes of strobing darkness. In those split-second bursts of shadow and light, I saw them differently. Not 92 strangers, not versions of me, something else. Their outlines distorted, their features warping in unnatural ways, like reflections bending in broken glass. And each time the lights returned, they were standing slightly closer, the circle tightening without a sound. My chest seized with fear, and instinct kicked in. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a heavy glass lamp, and hurled it at Elias. It never touched him. The moment it should have struck, it shattered midair, dissolving into fine particles of light that evaporated before hitting the ground. I stumbled back, gasping, my heart hammering wildly. Elias didn't flinch, didn't even react. He just watched me, unblinking, as though studying a child throwing stones into an ocean. "It doesn't work like that," he said simply, and then he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A small, thin disc, black as obsidian, etched with the same shifting symbols as the box. He held it out, offering it to me. "You can fight us," he said, "or you can remember." I didn't take it. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, caught between fight and collapse, my mind screaming for me to do something. "Remember what?" I choked out, my voice barely audible. Elias took a step closer, his face inches from mine, and whispered, the first time. My stomach lurched violently, my head spinning as nausea clawed up my throat. "The first time what?" I demanded, but he didn't answer. He just placed the disc in my hand and stepped back, his expression unreadable. The moment the cold surface touched my skin, the room vanished. Everything, the house, the strangers, Elias, the walls, the air, my own body, dissolved into blinding white, and then suddenly I was somewhere else. The ground beneath me was soft and endless, stretching in all directions, glowing faintly like moonlit water. Above me, there was no sky, only a vast, swirling expanse of light and shadow, like standing beneath the underside of an ocean. And in the distance, hundreds, maybe thousands, of figures stood, all identical, all motionless, staring in the same direction. I turned, following their gaze, and that's when I saw it. Floating above the horizon was a colossal, pulsating sphere of white light, its surface rippling like liquid glass. It was the same light I'd seen inside the box, but infinitely larger, infinite in every sense of the word. I couldn't comprehend its size, its shape, its purpose. My knees buckled beneath me as a single thought slammed into my mind, unbidden and undeniable. This is the source. The voices came then, millions of them, layered into one, vibrating through every inch of me. Family means forever. The sound wasn't words anymore. It was sensation, memory, grief, birth, death, everything at once, compressed into meaning too vast for language. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was gone. I was back in the living room, gasping for air, clutching the black disc in my shaking hand. The 92 were still there. Elias was still watching me. Only now, I understood one thing I hadn't before. This wasn't the end of anything. This was the beginning. I don't remember deciding to move, but my legs carried me forward anyway, each step feeling heavier than the last as I descended the staircase. 92 pairs of eyes tracked me unblinking, silent, waiting. The banner above them, "Family means forever," seemed larger now, like the letters were swelling, absorbing the dim light of the room until the words themselves pulsed faintly alive. My throat was dry, my breath shallow, my heart hammering so violently I could hear it in my ears. The silence was unbearable, thick, pressing in on me from all sides, until finally one figure broke from the crowd, the tall silver-haired man in the navy suit who had called me Michael. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, echoing sharply in the stillness as he approached. He stopped just a few feet away and studied me with an expression I couldn't read. "You were supposed to come tomorrow," he said quietly, his voice measured like someone speaking to a frightened animal. "We didn't have time to prepare you." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "Prepare me for what?" My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I wanted answers. I needed something solid to hold on to, anything to anchor me to reality again. He tilted his head slightly, his expression softening, almost pitying. "For this," he whispered, gesturing to the room, to the crowd, to the entire impossible nightmare I had walked into. "For who you really are?" I shook my head violently. "No," I said, louder than I intended. "This is my house, my family, my life. Whoever you think I am, you're wrong." A ripple of unease spread through the crowd, but the man just smiled faintly, like a teacher amused by a stubborn student. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope, holding it out to me. "Open it," he said softly. My hands trembled as I took it, the paper heavy, oddly warm, like it had been carried close to someone's chest for a long time. I unfolded it slowly, my vision blurring as I scanned the single sheet inside. It was a birth certificate. My birth certificate, or at least, it looked like one. My name was there, my date of birth, but where my parents' names should have been, there were 2 words written in blocky, black type, Parajasitanima. I stared at the paper, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The silver-haired man stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "You were never supposed to know. Not yet. You were placed here, Michael. This life, the one you remember, the one you think is yours, it was constructed. Every photo, every memory, every relationship carefully built to prepare you for today." My knees nearly gave out beneath me, and I clutched the railing for support. That doesn't make sense. I managed to whisper. I'm not. I stopped, suddenly uncertain. Not what? Not who they thought I was? Not who I thought I was? The man seemed to sense the chaos in my mind because he spoke softly now, like explaining something to a child. Project Anima was designed to preserve the bloodline, he said. Nendi, 3 of you were created, each placed into different timelines, different families, different lives. 93, scattered across decades, waiting to be called back. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the silent crowd. These are the others. Your family. I looked at them, really looked at them, and my breath caught in my throat. Their faces were different, yes, but there were similarities I hadn't noticed before. A curve of the jaw, the tilt of an eyebrow, the exact same dimple in the left cheek. 92 people, all of them sharing fragments of me, or maybe I was sharing fragments of them. My stomach churned as I backed up, shaking my head. No, this isn't real. This is insane. But deep down, a small, terrible part of me already knew it was real. I thought of the photos in the hallway, of the Polaroid dated 1998, where I hadn't aged a day, of the strange boy warning me I wasn't supposed to be here yet. Then, from somewhere behind the crowd, a woman stepped forward, older, fragile, her white hair tied neatly in a bun. She carried a small black box in her hands, cradled like something sacred. Without a word, she opened it, revealing what looked like a thin, metallic device the size of a coin, faint blue light pulsing at its center. It's time, she said softly, her voice trembling but resolute. The silver-haired man turned to me, his expression solemn. You were the first one created, he said. You're the anchor. Without you, the rest of us... He trailed off, but I understood. Without me, none of them existed. I backed away instinctively. I don't want this, I said, my voice cracking. I don't want any of this. The man's eyes softened with something, almost like compassion. You don't have a choice, Michael. Family means forever. He nodded to the woman, and she approached slowly, holding the device out toward me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something, but my body felt rooted to the spot. The crowd began to whisper the phrase softly, in unison, their voices low and hypnotic. Family means forever. Family means forever. Family means forever. The woman pressed the device against my chest, just above my heart, and for a split second, nothing happened. Then the pain hit, white, hot, searing, ripping through every nerve in my body like liquid fire. I screamed, collapsing to my knees, clutching at my chest, but the silver-haired man knelt beside me, gripping my shoulders tightly. Breathe, he commanded. You have to let it in. The world tilted, colors fracturing and bleeding into one another as memories I didn't recognize flooded my mind. Places I'd never been, faces I'd never seen, voices I'd never heard. But they weren't strangers. They were mine. Lives stacked upon lives. 93 different existences, all collapsing into a single, unbearable truth. I was every version of myself that had ever existed. I gasped, choking on the weight of it, my chest heaving violently. Images flashed faster than I could process. Standing in a desert beneath 3 suns, holding hands with a child who called me father, in a language I didn't know, floating weightless among stars older than Earth, kneeling in a church lit by fire where 92 coffins burned around me. Each memory hit like a thunderclap, overwhelming, infinite, eternal. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I fell forward, hands on the floor, sweat dripping from my forehead, my body trembling uncontrollably. When I finally looked up, the crowd was smiling faintly, their eyes glowing faintly blue, the same shade as the light pulsing in the device. The silver-haired man extended his hand, helping me to my feet. Welcome home, he said simply. The banner above us seemed to shimmer now, the words no longer printed on fabric, but etched into the air itself, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Famila Mans Farvar. And in that moment, I understood there was no going back. The life I thought I'd built, the memories I thought were mine, the house I thought I owned, all of it had been scaffolding, a stage built for this single performance. I wasn't who I thought I was. I wasn't even who they thought I was. I was something older, deeper, something designed for a purpose I still couldn't fully comprehend. Somewhere, deep inside me, a voice I didn't recognize whispered 3 words. It begins now? The lights flickered. The 92 voices rose in perfect unison, and as the banner dissolved into blinding white light, the world, my world, ceased to exist.